One conservative MP flies to Washington and says he is going there to help Canada's trade negotiations.
I'm going to Washington because I want to help Prime Minister Mark Carney be successful.
Ottawa shuts it down quickly, calmly, and without theatrics. Here is why that matters right now. When pressure is rising, the biggest risk is not always the threat you can see. It is the back channel you cannot control. Controlling channels is how leverage is protected. This is analysis based on publicly available reporting in the clip shown. Where something is not confirmed by a primary document, that will be stated clearly. What happened and what made this different? In the clip, conservative MP Jamil Jivani says he is traveling to Washington to help Prime Minister Mark Carney be successful in negotiating a trade deal with the United States. He frames the trip as a patriotic and bipartisan effort. On the surface, that can sound reasonable. Members of Parliament do travel. They meet counterparts. They attend conferences. But this trip was not framed as a routine parliamentary visit. It was framed as involvement in trade negotiations. That distinction is crucial. According to reporting carried by Global News, Carney emphasized that Jivani is not the minister responsible for trade. He also emphasized that Jivani is not the opposition's trade critic. The same reporting notes that Minister Dominic LeBlanc briefed Jivani before the trip. It also notes that Ottawa already maintains extensive and constant contact with the U.S. administration. Those details are not rhetorical, they are structural. They establish that Canada already has official negotiating channels. They clarify who holds mandate and who does not. They signal discipline. Discipline is not a tone. Discipline is a safeguard. Another detail mattered as well. Global News reported that Jivani is a longtime friend of U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. That fact does not prove intent. It is not an accusation, but it does help explain the speed and precision of Ottawa's response. Personal relationships can become informal conduits. Informal conduits can complicate negotiations quickly. When stakes are high, speed matters. Why Ottawa moved immediately? This was about channels, not personalities. In Ottawa terms, this is not drama. It is procedure. Procedure is power. In any serious negotiation, who speaks is part of the negotiation. If multiple people can plausibly claim to carry messages from Canada, the other side can choose which message it prefers. It can disregard the rest. That is how leverage erodes. So when Carney emphasizes mandate and stresses constant official contact, he is not simply correcting the record. He is tightening the message pipeline. Not personality, not optics. This is about channels. Channels are leverage. When a parallel channel appears, three risks follow. First is ambiguity. Washington can say it has heard different views from Canada. It does not have to prove that claim. Second is fragmentation. Domestically, parallel channels invite arguments over legitimacy. Those arguments weaken negotiating posture before any policy decision is made. Third is timing loss. When messages move outside official lanes, governments lose control over when and how signals land. In trade disputes, timing can be as costly as substance. This is why Ottawa treats freelance diplomacy as a vulnerability rather than a courtesy. The response was deliberate. There was no personal attack. There was no escalation. There was mandate, structure, and boundaries. Why this moment matters more than it might appear. This episode is unfolding during one of the most volatile stretches in the modern Canada-US relationship. The volatility is not because institutions have collapsed. It is because political signaling has become erratic. Trump has repeatedly used 51st state language when referring to Canada. In isolation, those comments can sound rhetorical. In a negotiation environment, they function differently. They test boundaries. They apply public pressure. They invite reaction. That does not mean every statement is policy. Governments cannot treat repeated sovereignty rhetoric as harmless background noise. Trade, security, and industrial policy are moving at the same time. Reuters reported in late January 2026 that Carney said he expects the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. That is a calibrated sentence. It does not escalate, it marks a line. It signals that boundaries matter. It tells you Ottawa believes those boundaries are being tested. In that environment, informal channels are not helpful. They are hazardous. The economic backdrop. Uncertainty has a price before policy does. Even when threats are vague, uncertainty alone can impose real economic costs. Markets react before policy is finalized. Investment decisions pause before tariffs exist. Supply chains hedge before rules change. That is why Ottawa guards negotiating discipline so closely. To ground this in reality, consider what AP reported about GM's Carney assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario. AP reported that GM paused or reduced production tied to low demand and high inventory for its bright drop electric delivery vans. GM said the decision was not due to tariffs. That distinction matters. It shows how exposed parts of the economy already are. It shows vulnerability before trade pressure even materializes. In that context, added instability compounds existing stress. That stress feeds back into politics. This is the environment Ottawa is managing, the pattern Ottawa is trying to contain. Another factor shaping Ottawa's response is how pressure has been applied in recent months. Canadian press reporting carried by Castanet described an episode involving a threat to decertify Canadian-made aircraft. After the threat, there was clarification about scope and technical context. You do not need to generalize that incident into a universal rule. You can recognize the policy challenge. When threats arrive first and clarification comes later, damage can occur before facts catch up. Confidence drops. Planning stalls. Pressure rises. In that environment, additional unofficial meetings do not help. They create new points of ambiguity. Those points must then be managed or corrected. Ottawa's incentive is clear. Reduce ambiguity nodes. One voice, one mandate, one channel. Intent versus impact. Semaphore reported that Jivani described meeting senior U.S. officials. He framed his effort as an attempt to diffuse tensions. He emphasized protecting Canada's economic interests. He also raised concerns about Canada expanding trade with China. You can agree or disagree with that position. That is a political debate. Even well-intentioned messages can be destabilizing if delivered outside mandate. Intent does not determine impact. Structure does. An unofficial channel can create uncertainty about what is negotiable. It can blur what is settled. It can confuse who speaks for Canada. That uncertainty can be exploited without overt hostility. Ottawa's response was designed to prevent that dynamic. No accusations, no spectacle, institutional clarity. That is containment. The signal Ottawa is sending abroad and at home. There are two audiences for this response. The first is Washington. Canada negotiates through accountable and authorized channels. If you want a deal, you talk to those responsible for outcomes. That narrows the room for coercive tactics. The second audience is domestic. The message is credibility. Canada's negotiating position will not be improvised. It will not be outsourced. It will be disciplined. Discipline does not guarantee success. It raises the cost of pressure. The easiest form of coercion finds an opening, a side door, a crack between institutions. Ottawa is working to seal those cracks. The takeaway: closing the back door is deterrence by procedure. Deterrence in trade and diplomacy often looks quiet. It looks like mandate control. It looks like message discipline. It looks like refusing to let uncertainty multiply. That is what this episode shows. Canada is operating in an environment where rhetoric can move faster than policy. Uncertainty can impose costs before decisions are finalized. In that environment, unofficial intermediaries are not harmless. They are vulnerabilities. When Carney closes the back door, He is not chasing a media moment. He is protecting the negotiating geometry. From here, the cost of freelancing Canada's foreign policy goes up. That changes the math.